Zeta-14 was a planet of harsh, unyielding beauty, a world bathed in the ashy glow of red-tinted clouds and under a sky that never seemed to clear. Its landscapes were a blend of rocky plains, jagged mountains, and a sprawling ashland where the wind stirred constantly, whipping clouds of gray dust across the desolate terrain. But beneath the surface, Zeta-14 was rich with minerals, valuable resources that Earth needed desperately. The colony on Zeta-14 thrived off these resources, but only with the aid of hired hunters and their advanced weaponry. Survival, here, wasn't guaranteed. The planet demanded constant vigilance. Of all the dangers on Zeta-14, none struck as much fear into the human heart as the Tyrothrax. The beast was an apex predator, a monstrous creature that towered over anything in its path. Its scales were black and ridged, so thick that even the most advanced human weapons struggled to penetrate them. Razor-sharp talons protruded from its powerful limbs, and a row of serrated teeth lined its enormous jaws, which could crush stone with ease. The Tyrothrax hunted without mercy, leaving only carnage in its wake. The colonists had come to know it as a harbinger of death, a living nightmare from which few escaped. The mining corporation had declared the creature a menace. With plans to expand their operation, the corporation had enlisted a team of elite hunters, armed with a prototype plasma rifle designed specifically for this mission. These hunters were veterans, men and women who had faced off against Zeta-14's deadliest fauna. They were confident, eager even, to add a Tyrothrax kill to their records. The hunt had been grueling. It took them days to locate the creature and hours to weaken it enough to land a direct shot with the plasma rifle. The weapon discharged a burning blue arc that sliced through the air and struck the Tyrothrax across its side, tearing through its armor-like scales and leaving a jagged, smoking wound. The creature staggered, letting out a blood-curdling roar that echoed across the plains. "Direct hit," shouted Hale, the squad leader, lowering the rifle with a look of grim satisfaction. The other hunters cheered, their voices filled with relief and pride. For a moment, they all stood there, panting, watching the massive beast thrash, then fall to the ground with a thud that shook the very earth. Blood, dark and viscous, oozed from the wound, staining the ash beneath it. The Tyrothrax's breathing grew labored, each rise and fall of its chest weaker than the last. "Let's leave it," Hale finally said, his voice cold and resolute. "The scavengers will finish the job." The hunters exchanged glances, some hesitant. But no one questioned Hale. They'd lost enough men to this creature's kin over the years. They felt a sick sense of triumph in watching it suffer, knowing it would die there, alone, on the cold ashlands. They turned and left, their footsteps crunching over the dry, gray earth as they made their way back toward their base. The landscape swallowed their sounds as they moved further away, leaving only the whistling of the wind and the faint, shuddering breaths of the dying beast. The Tyrothrax lay still, its eyes half closed, its powerful body weakened and broken. Time passed in agonizing slowness. Day bled into night, and in the fading light, scavenger creatures began to emerge. They were small, pale-skinned, and wiry, adapted to Zeta-14's barren landscape. Drawn by the scent of blood, they approached the beast's body cautiously, eyeing it with a mix of hunger and fear. They'd learned to avoid the Tyrothrax in life, but now it was vulnerable, helpless prey. One scavenger darted forward and sank its needle-like teeth into the beast's exposed wound. The Tyrothrax's body twitched, a low growl escaping its throat. Even in its weakened state, a primal fury stirred within. But it had no strength to swat the scavenger away, no voice left to roar. Another scavenger crept closer, then another, emboldened by the first. They began to feed, tearing small chunks of flesh from the wound, savoring the rare bounty. But as they did, something unexpected began to happen. The Tyrothrax's blood had begun to change, subtly and inexplicably. The regenerative abilities in its DNA, a trait unique to its species, had kicked in a survival adaptation that worked even under extreme duress. The scavengers, gnawing at its flesh, ingested the altered blood, but within moments, their bodies convulsed and collapsed. One by one, the creatures fell, their wiry bodies stiffening as toxins spread through them. Slowly, the Tyrannosaurus's body began to absorb microscopic traces of the toxins and compounds released by the scavengers as they died. Its cells adapted, synthesizing the foreign substances into a new, fortified defense. By some latent evolutionary design, the Tyrannosaurus was changing, even in its near-death state, its body equipping itself with what it needed to survive the brutal world around it. Night stretched on, and the Tyrannosaurus continued to lie motionless. But its mind, clouded by pain, burned with a simmering rage. It recalled flashes of the hunt, the humans' cold expressions, their laughter, their triumph. It remembered the agony of the plasma burn, the humiliation of defeat. By dawn, the last scavenger was dead, a small mound of bodies surrounding the beast. The Tyrannosaurus's breathing grew stronger, the rise and fall of its chest more steady, more deliberate. The blood in its veins pulsed with newfound resilience, every cell tuned to survival. In the dim light of morning, the Tyrannosaurus opened its eyes fully. They were no longer clouded, no longer dim. They burned with renewed life and with a fierce, calculating intelligence. A low, guttural growl rumbled from its throat, reverberating through the silent ashlands. It was not just alive, it was reborn, sharpened, strengthened by its ordeal. And something deep within it, something primal and relentless, craved retribution. Slowly, painfully, the Tyrannosaurus rose to its feet. The hunters thought they'd left it to die. They were wrong. The ashlands lay in a cold silence, the dark horizon stretching endlessly beneath the cloud-streaked sky. Days had passed since the Tyrannosaurus had been left for dead, abandoned by the human hunters who had thought their job finished. But far from dying, the creature had entered a strange, instinct-driven hibernation, its body shutting down almost entirely as it focused every ounce of energy into recovery. It was a rare adaptation, a final defense mechanism that had evolved over millennia in response to the harsh realities of survival on Zeta 14. The beast lay motionless, embedded in the ashes of its wound and the carcasses of scavengers that had dared to feed on it. It no longer bled freely, its body had thickened the blood around its injuries, forming a makeshift seal. In this vulnerable state, the Tyrannosaurus's body drew on all its natural reserves, slowing its heart to a crawl and halting nearly every non-essential function. It appeared dead, a monstrous statue in the middle of the plains. Yet, beneath the surface, the creature was undergoing a transformation. As its cells repaired the plasma-inflicted wounds, they also began a complex, adaptive process. The foreign compounds from the scavenger's toxins, absorbed during its dormant state, triggered a rapid, systematic change. The Tyrannosaurus's body started to metabolize these compounds, integrating them into its blood and tissues. This was not simple healing, it was evolution in real time. The beast was fortifying itself, incorporating new defenses against toxins and other threats it might face. Inside its mind, a faint awareness returned. Fragmented memories of the hunt resurfaced, the shock of the plasma rifle's burn, the flash of human faces, the cold abandonment. It did not understand betrayal or revenge as humans did, but deep in its instincts, there was a sense of unfinished purpose. The Tyrannosaurus could feel an unfamiliar urge stronger than its usual hunger or territorial instinct. It was something darker, a burning compulsion to track, to follow, to make the ones who had inflicted such agony feel the weight of their mistake. By the fifth night, the beast's dormant state began to break. Its breathing grew deeper, more even. The faint shimmer of life in its eyes grew into a sharp gleam as it awakened from its trance. When it finally moved, the transformation became clear. Its skin, once a deep black, was now mottled with faint patterns of gray and blue, a camouflage that matched the ashlands. The scales that had been seared by the plasma were harder than before, fused with microlayers of protective minerals absorbed from the planet's dust, forming a natural armor that made it nearly impervious to human weaponry. As it tested its limbs, the Tyrannosaurus found itself moving differently. Its senses, already formidable, felt even sharper. Its hearing picked up the faintest tremors in the ground. Its sight, attuned to the dim light of dawn, could perceive distant shapes as clearly as if they were nearby. More remarkably, its metabolism had shifted, allowing it to sustain itself for extended periods without food. This was a creature born anew, an apex predator now elevated to something beyond the natural order of Zeta-14. Slowly, it began to stalk forward, moving with an uncanny silence across the ash-covered plains. Its wounds no longer ached, they were only reminders of its rage, a seething fury that seemed to propel it forward with every step. The thought of hunting the human hunters drove it, not from hunger, but from an instinct as ancient as life itself, an instinct for dominance, for retribution against those who had dared challenge it. It took little time for the Tyrannosaurus to pick up the scent of the humans. The hunters had left a trail, faint but unmistakable to a creature with senses as heightened as the Tyrannosaurus. Their scent was mixed with traces of plasma residue and the metal tang of weaponry. Each step seemed to bring the memory of their laughter, their triumph, sharper into focus. The images stoked its rage, pushing it further and further from its primal drives into something dangerously close to thought. It did not simply want to hunt, it wanted to ensure they could never harm it or any creature like it again. As the Tyrannosaurus advanced, the terrain became familiar. The ashlands shifted into rocky hills, and in the distance, it could make out the faint glimmer of human structures. These were the perimeters of the human settlement, the fortress-like encampment where they lived and worked. The beast slowed, watching, calculating. The camp was fortified with tall barriers, automated laser turrets, and observation towers. Floodlights cast bright beams across the area, sweeping over the ash-covered landscape to detect any movement. It was a fortress designed to keep the planet's wild creatures at bay. The Tyrannosaurus waited, hiding in the shadows, watching the humans go about their routines. It observed the guards as they patrolled the perimeter, noted the brief gaps in their routes, and registered the timing of the laser turrets' rotations. It had never hunted with patience or strategy before, but now, some strange instinct seemed to be guiding its actions. The humans had taught it about pain, about stealth, about fear. And it was learning, adapting with a speed and intelligence that defied even the wildest projections of Zeta-14's evolutionary biologists. When night fell, the Tyrannosaurus began its silent approach. Its mottled hide blended seamlessly with the shadows, allowing it to inch closer without setting off any alarms. It crept toward the encampment, biding its time, studying every detail of its prey's defenses. Every misstep they had made in assuming it would die played to its advantage. They had underestimated its resilience, its ability to adapt, and now, that miscalculation would cost them. The perimeter defenses were the first challenge. The automated turrets scanned the area methodically, but the Tyrannosaurus, now a creature of patience, waited for the precise moment when the beams crossed in a specific pattern, leaving a narrow blind spot. It slipped through undetected, crouching low to the ground, a shadow against the ash. Inside the perimeter, it moved through the camp with deadly silence, weaving through the shadows as it approached the nearest patrol. The human guard, oblivious to the terror lurking in the dark, had no chance. With a single, swift movement, the Tyrannosaurus slashed, leaving the guard lifeless before he could utter a sound. One by one, it eliminated those in its path, leaving only silence and terror in its wake. The few humans who saw the shadowy figure in the corner of their eye thought it was a trick of the light, a fleeting nightmare. But by the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. The Tyrannosaurus moved as if possessed by a purpose far beyond simple survival. It was exacting a vengeance as old as the predator-prey dynamic itself, striking with a calculated wrath that made it unstoppable. The camp fell silent, its guards either dead or missing. In the dim moonlight, the Tyrannosaurus stood amidst the aftermath, its form barely distinguishable from the shadows around it. In its eyes, there was a quiet, primal satisfaction and understanding that it had transcended its role as prey, emerging as something more. As the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, the beast retreated into the ashlands, leaving only carnage and fear behind. The humans had left it to die, but it had returned, reborn in their own nightmares. Now, with a new strength, a new intelligence, and an insatiable drive, the Tyrothrax roamed the plains of Zeta 14, no longer just an apex predator, but something far more dangerous. And as it faded into the shadows of the ashlands, one thing became clear: the humans' time on this planet was running out. The aftermath of the attack spread fear like wildfire through the human colony on Zeta 14. Reports of the hunters' deaths, of bodies torn apart with precision, circulated with whispers of disbelief and horror. This was no ordinary attack. The Tyrothrax, thought to have been vanquished, had returned in with a level of lethality no one could explain. In the command center, Lieutenant Maris paced back and forth, her face drawn with fatigue and anxiety. She was a veteran of planetary expeditions, hardened by years in hostile environments, but the recent reports had unnerved even her. She replayed the footage of the assault on the hunters' camp, shadowy glimpses of a towering, monstrous figure moving with an unnatural stealth and efficiency. It was as if the Tyrothrax had not just recovered, but evolved into something new, something more cunning, more lethal. "Lieutenant, this isn't possible," said Dr. Reyes, the colony's lead biologist, shaking his head as he studied the readouts. "The Tyrothrax has never exhibited behavior like this. They're solitary hunters, yes, but they don't plan. They don't retaliate. It doesn't matter what's possible or not," Dr. Maris replied, her voice tight. "What matters is that this thing is out there, and it's killing our people with frightening precision. We need to assume it's learned to evade our defenses." "We don't know how it even survived the plasma wound," Reyes murmured, staring at the autopsy reports of the dead hunters. "We thought we understood its biology, but this is something entirely new." Maris clenched her fists. She knew what had to be done. They couldn't just sit and wait for the beast to strike again. "We need to track it down and eliminate it permanently this time. No half measures." They assembled a team, a group of elite soldiers outfitted with the colony's most advanced weaponry. Maris herself would lead the squad, equipped with modified plasma rifles, reinforced armor, and motion-tracking technology. They took extra precautions, installing sensors throughout the terrain surrounding the settlement to detect any movement larger than a rabbit. And as a last line of defense, they upgraded the laser turrets to fire at any non-human entity that crossed the perimeter. But even with every safeguard in place, a heavy sense of dread hung over the camp. They all knew, deep down, that they were no longer dealing with the same creature. The Tyrothrax had become something else, something that understood them. At dusk, the hunt began. Maris and her team moved carefully through the ashlands, their boots crunching softly in the dust. They formed a tight formation, eyes scanning the rocky terrain, weapons at the ready. The landscape stretched before them in eerie silence, the light fading into a dark blue-gray that cast strange shadows over the ground. "Motion sensors active?" Maris whispered into her comm, her voice barely a breath. "Affirmative, Lieutenant," replied one of the soldiers. "Nothing on the scope so far. It's quiet." But Maris knew better than to trust the silence. She had studied the footage of the camp attack. The creature moved like a shadow, waiting, calculating. If it was watching them now, they would never know until it was too late. They continued forward, moving with the cautious precision of soldiers trained for hostile encounters. The ashlands were a treacherous terrain, dotted with steep cliffs and sudden drops. Shadows shifted unpredictably as the wind picked up, and each member of the team gripped their weapons tighter, watching every movement. Then, without warning, the ground seemed to explode around them. The Tyrothrax burst from beneath a ridge of rocks, moving faster than any creature Maris had ever seen. In a single leap, it closed the distance, a blur of black and gray scales. Before the nearest soldier could react, it struck, claws slicing through armor as if it were paper. "Fire! Fire!" Maris shouted, but the beast had already moved. Plasma shots illuminated the darkness, brief flashes of blue-white light, but each time they fired, the Tyrothrax was a step ahead, ducking and weaving through their line of fire with an agility that defied its massive form. It moved with a strange, almost calculated intent, aiming for weak points in their formation, exploiting gaps with a terrifying precision. The soldiers were no match. One by one, they fell, their screams swallowed by the howling wind and the endless expanse of the ashlands. Maris fired her rifle in quick bursts, trying to track the creature, but it was too fast, too unpredictable. She caught glimpses of its eyes, intelligent, calculating, and filled with a cold, predatory fury. In the chaos, Dr. Reyes, monitoring from the command center, spoke through Maris's earpiece, his voice tinged with panic. "Lieutenant, the creature it's learning. It's adapting to the plasma shots. The regenerative capabilities, it's faster than we predicted. You need to retreat." Maris gritted her teeth, torn between duty and survival. The creature was wiping them out methodically, picking them off like prey. "All units, fall back to the perimeter. Regroup at the settlement," she ordered, retreating toward the colony with the few remaining soldiers. As they raced back, the Tyrannosaurus pursued, relentless, its massive limbs carrying it over rocks and ash with an unnatural grace. It seemed tireless, a creature reborn with a single purpose. The settlement's lights appeared on the horizon, a distant shimmer of hope, and Maris prayed they could make it in time. The laser turrets activated as they neared the perimeter, firing a volley of beams toward the creature. But the Tyrannosaurus had been watching, learning. It altered its path, weaving through the beams with a terrifying precision, dodging each shot with inhuman agility. It had become a creature of pure, calculated instinct, every movement designed for survival and domination. Maris stumbled through the gate, panting, and turned just in time to see the last soldier in her team fall beneath the creature's claws. The Tyrannosaurus roared, a guttural, bone-chilling sound that echoed through the settlement, sending a shiver of terror through everyone within earshot. The creature was at their gates, and no barrier seemed capable of stopping it. Inside the command center, Dr. Reyes stared at the monitors, horrified. "It's adapting to everything we throw at it. It's like it's evolving in real time. Lieutenant, if this thing keeps adapting we won't have a chance," Maris finished, her voice a mix of dread and resolve. She glanced at her plasma rifle, now a useless weight in her hands. "We need to evaluate the colony. Whatever we unleashed, it's beyond anything we're capable of stopping." The order was given, and the alarms blared as the colony began its evacuation. People scrambled to pack essential equipment, loading the transport ships as quickly as they could. But the Tyrannosaurus, relentless and vengeful, had already breached the perimeter. It tore through the structures with an almost methodical precision, sparing no one and leaving destruction in its wake. As Maris boarded the last transport, she looked back at the colony. Smoke billowed up into the sky, and the faint glow of fires lit the ashlands. The Tyrannosaurus was there, standing amidst the wreckage, watching them with its cold, calculating eyes. In that moment, Maris understood something terrifying. The Tyrannosaurus had not only survived, it had surpassed. Whatever they had done to it, whatever they had pushed it to become, had transformed it into the ultimate apex predator, something that could no longer coexist with humanity. It was no longer just a creature of Zeta 14, it was a force, an unrelenting reminder of nature's fury against those who tried to control it. As the transport lifted off, Maris felt a chill run down her spine, knowing the transport soared into the sky, leaving the scorched colony behind. From the windows of the departing ships, the colonists watched as Zeta 14's surface receded, revealing the dark expanse of the ashlands, the gutted remains of their settlement, and, standing amidst the ruins, the towering figure of the Tyrannosaurus. Even from this distance, its dark shape was unmistakable, a lone silhouette in the shadows, watching their departure with a cold, calculating gaze. Lieutenant Maris slumped back in her seat, her face pale, her mind reeling. They had done the unthinkable. Not only had they failed to kill the Tyrannosaurus, but they had somehow triggered an evolution that had transformed it into a creature far beyond any apex predator the planet had ever known. It was no longer just a territorial beast defending its land, it was something else, something capable of vengeance and tactical thinking. The Tyrannosaurus had transcended the natural order, rising to a state of predatory dominance that made it unstoppable. From the seat beside her, Dr. Reyes sat in silence, his face a mixture of awe and horror. The creature's adaptation and intelligence had defied every principle of evolutionary biology. It had learned faster, adapted more efficiently, and evolved more dramatically than anything he had ever studied. "We pushed it too far," he muttered, his voice hollow. "We made it into this." Maris turned to him, her eyes narrowing. "We didn't make it, Doctor. We tried to kill it, and it survived. It chose this path." Reyes shook his head, disagreeing softly. "No. It was our interference, our arrogance. We underestimated its will to survive, its adaptability. And now it's something we can't control or contain." The colony's evacuation was in chaos. The other ships had already made for orbit, but not without carrying with them the memory of the colony's downfall. Every survivor had seen the Tyrannosaurus, heard the terrible roars echoing through the ashlands, and understood that they were leaving Zeta-14 to a creature that could no longer be confined by any cage or weapon humanity possessed. Back on the surface, the Tyrannosaurus prowled through the ruins of the colony, examining the structures it had torn apart. Every building, every barricade, and every vehicle was a remnant of the invaders who had tried to subdue it. The beast's newfound intelligence, paired with its predatory instincts, drove it to understand this strange world of metal and lights. It moved with eerie purpose, sniffing at destroyed weapons, testing the remains of the laser turrets with its massive claws. In its mind, a simple but consuming understanding had formed. These intruders, these humans, had disrupted its world, inflicted pain, and then fled. But it knew they would come back. They always did. And so, the Tyrannosaurus would be ready. For now, it stalked the plains alone, reasserting its dominance over the territory, reclaiming the ashlands as its own. Word of the Tyrannosaurus's attack spread through the outer colonies and eventually reached Earth. The corporations that managed Zeta-14 scrambled to assess the damage and find a solution. Public relations teams downplayed the event, describing it as a temporary evacuation, but among the scientists and strategists, there was quiet panic. The plasma rifle, the most advanced weapon humanity had failed against a creature that now seemed capable of adapting to anything thrown at it. The corporation assembled a think tank of biologists, engineers, and military strategists to develop a new plan. They studied the footage and telemetry data, analyzing every movement of the Tyrannosaurus, trying to uncover a weakness. But the more they looked, the more disturbing the data became. The creature had learned not only to avoid their weapons, but to anticipate them. Its new physiology rendered it nearly invulnerable to conventional weaponry, and its regenerative abilities meant it could recover from most injuries within hours. Every recorded encounter suggested that the Tyrannosaurus was a creature evolving on the edge of intelligence, capable of anticipating and countering human strategies. Desperation led to the creation of Operation Extinction. The plan was audacious, dangerous, and expensive. A small fleet of drones, equipped with experimental high-energy particle beams and designed for sustained pursuit, would be launched to Zeta-14. The idea was simple: to overwhelm the Tyrannosaurus with continuous firepower, exploiting any potential weak point until the creature could no longer regenerate. The operation would be monitored remotely, sparing humans from direct confrontation with the beast. Weeks later, the drones entered Zeta-14's atmosphere, hovering over the desolate ashlands. The Tyrannosaurus was easy to find. It had taken up residence near the destroyed settlement, marking its territory with the carcasses of other creatures. It sensed the drones the moment they entered the airspace, its eyes narrowing as it observed the metal forms hovering above. The drones released a barrage of high-energy beams, converging on the Tyrannosaurus in a relentless assault. The air filled with blinding blue light, the ground shook, and dust billowed into the sky. But the Tyrannosaurus was no longer a creature that merely relied on brute strength. It moved with terrifying speed and precision, evading the beams in unpredictable, darting patterns. It lunged and leaped, its massive claws swiping at the drones, dismantling one with a single strike. The operation, designed to neutralize it, quickly descended into chaos. The drones were fast, but the Tyrannosaurus was faster. It learned their movement patterns, anticipating their attacks. It lured them into tighter areas of the ashlands, where cliffs and boulders limited their maneuverability. The beast adapted, using the terrain to its advantage, systematically destroying each drone until the skies were silent once more. As the smoke cleared, the Tyrannosaurus stood victorious. The remains of the drones lay scattered around it, their sparks fading into the ash. With a roar that shook the mountains, the creature declared its dominance over this latest assault, sending a clear message to anyone watching: Zeta-14 belonged to it now. On Earth, the think tank watched the failure of Operation Extinction in horrified silence. The footage showed a creature that had evolved into something they could no longer classify. It was not simply an apex predator, it was an apex ascendant, a being that seemed to learn and adapt with every encounter. The corporations withdrew from Zeta-14, issuing a statement that it was a biohazard zone, off-limits to further exploration. Behind closed doors, they labeled it a lost cause. The data from the operation became classified, buried under layers of secrecy to keep the truth from spreading. The legend of the Tyrannosaurus, however, could not be buried. Whispers of the creature reached the farthest reaches of the colonies, a story of an apex predator that had outsmarted humanity, a tale that instilled fear and awe in equal measure. Back on Zeta-14, the Tyrannosaurus resumed its solitary existence, patrolling the ashlands it had claimed. It hunted with unmatched skill, a creature that had risen beyond the cycle of predator and prey, a being of calculated power and intelligence. The humans had left, but the Tyrannosaurus remembered them. It understood that they might one day return. And if they did, it would be ready. In the dusk of Zeta-14, under the endless red-tinted sky, the Tyrannosaurus roared once more. The sound echoed across the barren plains, a powerful and resonant cry that seemed to reach into the very soul of the planet. It was a declaration, a promise that Zeta-14 belonged to it and would belong to it alone. The humans had tried to tame it, to kill it, to abandon it. But in the end, it was the Tyrannosaurus who ruled.